So first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me in the Open Source Systems 2020. It is a pleasure for me to participate even in this difficult situation, even remotely, even if I can only see one
Inviting
camera
me
in
in
uh,
the open source
my pleasure to participate. I hear some echo. Okay. So, indeed, as Giancarlo mentioned, I'm a program and policy officer at the European Commission in DigiConnect, and more specifically in Unit E2, which is
I hear some echo.
okay. So, indeed, as Giancarlo mentioned, I'm a program and policy officer in Giancarlo. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Odysseas, we are all hearing you, and we have muted all the chat apart from yours. So I hope.
Okay, because I was listening my voice with some delay. Let's hope that we won't have this problem. So I was saying that I'm working in DigiConnect, European Commission DigiConnect Unit E2, which is responsible for research and innovation actions, but also for policy making in the area of cloud computing and software technologies. So in my speech, I will try in 20 minutes more or less to grab what we are currently doing in the context of policy making, also in research innovation related to open source software and hardware. And I think this is also very much related to the next panel we're going to have in the conference, which is about research and innovation, EU funded research and innovation for open source. I do have a slide. I'm trying now to share my screen. Okay. So can you all see my presentation?
Yes, very good.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
All right. So we all know, and I don't have to to convince someone about the importance and the value of open source. Open source has great potential and can bring a huge value. We know that very well, and we know that also in the European Commission, since open source brings new business opportunity, creates new business models and extensive assets on which we can build innovative products for the EU citizens. The market and investors clearly understand this, and the past 2 years we have a boom in acquisitions of enterprises built on open source business models, which is a fact that clearly demonstrates the potential of open source. This is definitely a clear mindset of the IT industry if we compare what happened 20 years ago when we had a lot of discussion even within the European Commission about open source software. And definitely now we see that everybody recognizes the importance and the role of open source in the digital transformation. For this reason, the European Commission definitely looks forward to getting the most benefit of open source for the EU citizens and enterprises, and always highlights the role of open source within EU digital policies and several other initiatives. Open source for sure enhances competition and fastens innovation. And with this, doesn't mean that open source works as a competitor on different other business models based on proprietary solutions. But actually, open source increases competitive pressures towards innovation, even in case of monopolistic markets. So for sure, open source can lower the barriers for new entrants, reducing the burden to use what had been already developed and converting this into real innovation. This is very, very important. And also another aspect that I would like to highlight is the role of open source and its power to achieve digital sovereignty. There are several ways of achieving digital sovereignty, but the open source approach, if I allowed to say so, plays a very specific role because with open source, the quest for sovereignty as such becomes obsolete because open source is based on collaboration and sharing among the different stakeholders within the community, and then this is the way that actually can create innovation and can foster innovation and further development. In my presentation, I would like to highlight the fact that when we're talking about open source, even within the European Commission, and contrary to what was the case several couple of years ago, nowadays we're considering open source, but also open source hardware, and we believe that open source hardware it is a hot topic nowadays, and actually it could be the next big thing, and also can lead innovation in several domains where today or even a couple of years ago it seems to be very closed markets and where you not even apply open source techniques. And needless to say that we have different subdomains that actually open source hardware can be addressed, like open processors, like RISC-V, for example, open silicon, open hardware platforms, 3D printing, etc. So now let's go a little bit into discussion on the role of EU-funded research and innovation and open source. The European Commission encouraged the use of and development of open source software in EU-funded research projects since 1999, which was the beginning of the 5th framework program for research and innovation. And since then, the Commission strongly supports, through our research and innovation project, the development of open source solutions. Just to mention one out of many successful initiatives stem out of European EU research innovation programs, I would like to mention Fireware, which is an open source cloud platform with a collaborative and mature ecosystem of developers, innovation hubs, accelerators, cities, and more than 1,000 small and medium-sized enterprises and startups. According to the Fireware Foundation, by the end of this year, business leveraging the Fireware platform are expected to guarantee revenues of more than 330 million euros. Another area that I would like to mention related is the relationship with open source and e-government. Even though within the European Commission, DG Connect is not leading in these initiatives, because most of them are led by another service of the Commission, DG. The role of the open source software strategy, it was important in order to develop internally within the Commission the right mindset towards open source solutions. So in December 2000, the Commission developed the first strategy concerning the internal use of open source software. Since then, there was several updates of the strategy, and the current version of the strategy put a special emphasis on procurement, contribution of open source software project, and providing more of the software developed within the Commission as open source. That was actually the latest update of 2017. Later on in my presentation, I will give some insights on the upcoming revision of the open source software strategy to be presented later on this year, most probably. So furthermore, in 2007, the European Commission created the European Union Public License, the well-known EUPL, and the purpose of EUPL is to encourage public administration, starting with the EU institutions, to use the free and open source model. It is legally consistent with the copyright law of all EU member states and supports other popular open source licenses as well. And last but not least, I would like to mention the Italian Declaration on e-government, which was signed in October 2017 by 32 ministers in the European area, that is the EU member states, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. And the Italian Declaration highlighted the key role open source play for Europe. And in this declaration, the minister highlighted the fact that we should make more use of open source solutions and on open standards when rebuilding IT systems and solutions within public administration. And also, the Commission should consider strengthening the requirements for use of open source solutions and standards when rebuilding IT systems and solutions with EU funding. Another point that I would like to highlight is Commission's efforts towards bringing together the open source communities with the standards developing organizations. The last, I would say, 5 years, there's an ongoing discussion and a lot of discussion and different approaches on how the standards development organizations can benefit from the open source model, and how we can, and under which condition we can bring these two communities together in order to accelerate innovation. This is very relevant in the ICT, where actually we have seen that the open source communities are moving very fast and actually adopting ad hoc standards based on the implementation coming from the communities. Now, the question is, are we doing enough? Most probably not. And why I'm saying this? First of all, if you see the findings of a very recent report from Bitkom, which is the German Association for the IT industry, shows that 75% of German companies have interest in open source and only 4% are skeptical. This is exactly what I mentioned before as a very clear shift in the mindset within the industry about open source. On the contrary, though, only 1 out of 5 companies has an open source strategy, and more than 75% have no strategic approach. In addition, even a third of companies participate in the development of or further development of open source software. That means that they are mainly users of open source rather than contributors. Furthermore, in our recent workshop that we have carried out in November 2019 in Brussels about the role of open source beyond 2020, the participants highlight the fact that the European Commission should reinforce the use of open source in the Research Innovation Framework Program, and also that there is a need for further policy actions, more specifically on regulations to foster competition in the digital arena. So, with this said, now we'll try, to briefly give you some insights on current policy and other initiatives which are related to open source. And with this, I have to say that we are in a very critical position because now we are just a couple of months after the new congress that have taken place, and the new commissioner, Mr. Breton, who is responsible for digital transformation in Europe. And also we are in the ongoing discussions about the next multi-annual financial framework, which is actually the instrument for funding European Commission activities. So, and I have to say that there are several funding programs foreseen in the future about digital, concerning funding digital technologies and infrastructures, namely the Digital Europe program, the Connecting Europe Facility, the program, especially the digital part, the Invest in You, and of course, Horizon Europe, the next framework program for research and innovation. So going to further details on this, I would like to start with the next generation internet, an initiative that started already in Horizon 2020, and it's an initiative focusing on the internet, on the human-centered internet. So in other words, next generation internet is an internet that meets the full potential for the society and economy and reflects the social and ethical values that people enjoy within the EU. And we have the competitive advantage of being at the front run of the policies protecting internet users through regulations like GDPR and eIDAS. But in addition to regulations, we need technologies in order to support open, trusted, and human-centric internet. And these technologies include privacy-enhancing technologies and personal data spaces, future research technologies, decentralized ledgers and blockchains, technology supporting inclusion, and of course, multilingualism within the EU. In this context, of course, the role of open source is crucial because it is inherent in the nature of next generation internet, the openness. So therefore, NGI supports the open source approach as a way to multiply the impact of EU funding by allowing reuse and further enhancement of the code produced under the NGI. It also supports open source because it makes the code transparent and help increase its security and reliability. Two key features of the future internet. It finally supports open source as a key element of the openness and permissionless innovation that is at the heart of the NGI approach. I had a problem with my internet connection. Can you still hear me?
Yes, very well. Very well.
Okay, very well. Great. Thank you very much, Carlo. Giancarlo. So another initiative I would like to mention is the digital strategy. Digital strategy is I would say a set of proposed policies by the European Commission, which has been published last February, and the adoption of the digital strategy with entitled Shaping Europe's Future is accompanied with the artificial intelligence white paper and the data strategy, which aims to ensure that the digital transformation works for people, business, and the planet overall in line with the EU values. More specifically, the data strategy aims to create a single market for data that will ensure the Europe's global competitiveness and data sovereignty. Of course, you can perfectly understand the open source can play a key role in the successful implementation of the digital strategy overall. But let's go a little bit into detail on the AI strategy in the white paper, the AI white paper, and how open source can have a role there. So the AI strategy has been published in April 2018 and have been complemented by the AI white paper that has been published last February together with the digital strategy. And in the strategy, it is clear that in order to enable European companies and citizens to reap the benefits of AI, we need a solid European framework. And this is the aim of the AI strategy. One of the main elements of the strategy is an ambitious proposal to achieve a major boost in investments in AI-related research and innovation, and in facilitating and accelerating the adoption of AI across the economy. What is important to mention is that among the actions foreseen in the AI strategy and in the implementation of the AI for EU initiative is to identify leading open source activities and where useful establish dialogue, liaisons, or partnerships with such open source projects. So you see, even in the text of the strategy, it's clearly mentioned and highlighted the role of open source. Now, if we go into more details on the European strategy for data, or the European data strategy, which was also published last February, it aims to create a single market for data and a trustworthy data and cloud infrastructure. So that means that data can flow within the EU and across sectors freely. There will be availability of high quality data to create and innovate, and this data set should be freely publicly available. And European rules, of course, and values should be fully respected in this European data space. And of course, there should be clear rules for access and use of data in a way that all the process will be transparent and will promote competition and innovation. So in this context, it's also important to highlight the role of the cloud and in the proposal for the Cloud Federation. So the Cloud Federation is one of the pillars of the elements of the data strategy, and is an essential part in order to make the data strategy achieve its objectives. And the focus is on creating a thriving data sharing and artificial intelligence ecosystems. And in order to do so, we need to have the essential infrastructure. So we need to foster the computing supply by building pan-European interconnections of cloud providers' infrastructures, and also to design cloud-to-edge competitive, secure, energy efficient service and marketplaces. It is important to consider the full cloud continuum and not only the data center based approach, because we have seen that more and more data will come from the edge, and then we need to make sure that we provide the essential means, technologies, and infrastructures to the European companies in order to innovate in the edge domain as well. Also, I mean, we need to see the demand side. We need to see how we can respond to the user needs on sector-specific domains, also to stimulate the cloud demand in other domains, like public administration, where actually cloud computing is lagging behind. And for this, of course, we need to enable the data spaces through facilitation of hosting, storage, and processing activities. In this picture, you will see the big picture, how we see some of the European data spaces described and foreseen in the data strategies, but also within discussions between the European Commission and the stakeholders. This is not, we don't, in this slide, you do not see the prioritization, if you can say. And on the bottom of the page, you will see the essential infrastructure needed, the federated cloud infrastructure needed in order to make this happen. Again, the role of open source in the realization of the data strategy, and more specifically in the realization of European Cloud Federation, is huge. I expect that such solutions, federated solutions, and pan-European cloud infrastructures could be achieved through proprietary solutions. You perfectly know that the hyperscalers, cloud hyperscalers, are outside of Europe, and the focus is not, of course, having anyone outside of this initiative, but also the focus is to promote and to boost the European cloud leaders as well, and not to make sure that we have interoperable and portable solutions. Some other initiatives I would like to mention very briefly, because don't have a lot of time, is the European Processor Initiative, very important initiative, because the aim of the EPI is to develop a competitive low-power processor technology for advanced computing, and the envisaged fields of applications are primarily high-performance computing, but also embedded applications that demand high-end computing, such as future autonomous driving systems. Needless to say that EPI is heavily based on the use and development of open source hardware and software, and one of the architectures that is considering is the RISC-V architecture. Another aspect which is important in almost every digital initiative within the European Commission is digital skills, its skills. And in the context of open source, we consider that open source developers have the freedom and associated rewards to contribute to existing projects, capitalize on newly created innovative products, and benefit from the interaction with developers community. In this way, they can also increase their visibility and employability into European labor market, which is something very important in current situation and towards reducing unemployment, especially among youth. So given the additional benefits open source software can offer to all economic and societal actors of the economy, Europe should unlock its potentials by investing into future open source trends such as open source hardware and equipping European citizens with the relevant coding skill sets to fully contribute, benefit, and exploit from them. This is one of the priorities for the EU digital skills. Now I'm coming back to the European Commission open source software strategy, and in this slide you can see the evolution of the strategy. So you see that we have started in 2000 with the use only approach of the infrastructure, and then gradually moved to the use of tools, then the development and production of open source systems and components, then the active contribution as it has been highlighted in the revision from 2014, and now in the last version, the upcoming revision of the open source software strategy, we foresee the shift towards transforming internally the business and think open, think collaboratively within the European Commission. This is not an easy task, of course, and we need to start by transforming our information management and technological processes based on the principles of open source, and then to see if we can gradually move also to other proper processes, and why not also in policy making within the European Commission. Because what we want, after all, is to bring Europe's people together in an inclusive and open approach to find new opportunities and transition to an inclusive and better digital world, which is ready for the new realities of the modern global economy. That means that we strongly believe that open source could be a model of work even within the European Commission. Now, closing my short brief presentation on initiatives and policies related to open source software and hardware, I have to mention the ongoing study that we're carrying out together with Fraunhofer and Institute and Open Forum Europe on the economic impact of open source software and hardware for the European economy, for the technological independence. This study, which is ongoing, started January this year and will be a 13-month study. So 13-month study, that means that we're going to finish early in 2021. Will actually tries to identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges for open source in relevant ICT policies like AI, digitizing European industry, connected cars, high-performance computing. Now, of course, the digital strategy, the new digital strategy, and the data strategy, and so on and so on. And also tries to analyze, of course, the economic impact, in a methodological way, in order to have an instrument of measuring the direct and indirect impact of open source software and hardware in Europe. And to do this in a methodological way, and we can use this instrument also in this is very important for our policy making and on our evidence-based, I would say, policy making. And of course, last but not least, the study should provide recommendation on the strategic role of the open source to future policies and programs. Before closing, I cannot mention the role of open source in the COVID-19 crisis. I mean, the crisis has clearly shown how reliant our economies are and societies on digital technologies and the digital infrastructures. We couldn't even have this virtual, I would say, conference if we wouldn't have digital essential digital infrastructure and technologies. And then, of course, in this context, the open source software and hardware heavily contributed in getting out of the crisis, or towards getting out of the crisis, if I may, because in several areas of the world, the crisis is, it's evolving, and we don't know yet what will be the outcome, unfortunately. So open source has helped towards getting out of the crisis in various ways. Several contributions on contact tracing apps, open source hardware respirators developed, masks, other medical equipment. I mean, the list is very long. Also, this gives us the opportunity to highlight to our policymakers the role of digital technologies for the future, and that the fact that we need to reinforce the support for digital technologies through funding mechanisms and policies. And this is very important. And I think now the message has passed to our leaders. And I'm pretty sure that in the coming weeks, months, we'll see, because I have mentioned we have an ongoing discussion on the next multi-annual financial framework. We may see a lot of changes and reallocation of budget, and hopefully towards supporting digital technologies and, of course, open source. So before closing my presentation, I would like to say that I strongly believe that open source will help Europe, and not only Europe, in achieving digital sovereignty and technological excellence through collaboration and not in isolation. This is my personal message for the open source, and also I hope this message will be heard also to throughout the world, and also, I mean, to our decision makers. So with this, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Odysseas. It was a great pleasure to host you here. We collected several questions from the audience. The first one comes from our colleague Geir Horn from University of Norway, and he asks for European open source license. So that is most compatible with other licenses, and it appears that it's not quite known in the community at the moment, and especially when we consider the well-known repositories like GitHub, GitLab. And his question is, would that be a requirement for European research projects to like support this license and actually publish through this license? Back to you. I mute myself.
Okay. Easily. So, thank you very much for the question. No, EUPL, it's it's a well-known license and it has 13 years of it's responsible for the maintenance of the license and the evolution of the license in Digit have considered updating, changing, and make it more appealing for the open source communities. And there is an ongoing discussion there. Now, coming to the research and innovation program, with regards to open source software and hardware, we usually do not foresee a specific license. And the reason is the following. We cannot have a blanket provision saying that we need this or that license, because there are different innovation paths and exploitation approaches on how you can deal with open source. So my opinion is that this would be the approach also in Horizon Europe. With this said, though, it is also true that might be cases in specific areas or even in specific research topics where we would like to adopt a specific innovation path and exploitation path. Then we may be more specific on which kind of license to be followed, or even other aspects of open source software like governance or I mean, communities, how to not foster the communities as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sir. I remind the audience that you can post the questions in the chat. I will continue with the question. So next question from Karen is about AI for Europe, AI for EU. That actually illustrates the problem. So in establishing dialogue, licensing, partnership with open source projects that assumes that existing open source project. So his question was, why not define the open source project based on what is not available from existing projects? So, and make strategy on how you research projects can fill that gap.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Indeed, this is very important. We do not want to reinvent the wheel every 7 years or every 6 years. Definitely, we need to build upon the EU-funded project, research and innovation actions, but also in the broader context, what is the current state of the art and state of practice? We are doing this. I mean, we are doing the gap analysis, and when we are drafting the work program, and this is an ongoing and work in progress for the drafting the work programs for the first years of Horizon Europe, even if, as I've mentioned, we haven't agreed on budget, on the strategic orientations and all these things, but we definitely, with consultations with our stakeholders, with our research communities, with open source communities, we are trying to see what are the gaps, what should be the priorities in order to achieve the big objectives.
Thank you very much, Odysseas. Next question again from Kier is about the cloud federations. And his concern is that it is a top-down legal and policy-driven initiative, so some kind of standardization. And his major concern is about data, which has value in this, say, value chain. And so his idea is why not think secure interoperability of different islands. Yes, so to ensure the flexibility of open source software infrastructure so that everybody can achieve and use this technology. not laws and standards, but rather open source infrastructure to make those islands communicate.
Okay, thanks again for the question about cloud, about the data strategy in Cloud Federation. Where the thing is more complicated. We need both. We need technologies, but we need also to make sure that our initiatives are coherent with other policy initiatives, and also the big objectives and the big goals for the European Commission and this college. With this said, definitely we need the infrastructure. Definitely we need the essential technological components. Hopefully, most of them will be open source based, in order to provide to the community the federated cloud infrastructure, which means federated infrastructures, federated service upon this, and also way that data can be used, and also in the way that actually the data space can be realized. So I would say, yes, we need both. No, we cannot do without the legal, we cannot avoid, I'm an engineer also, but we cannot avoid legal and policy open questions, that's for true. Because otherwise, we may enter into a situation that we have built the perfect infrastructure and best federated services, but the enterprise are not able or do not know how to use them and how to make the most out of it.
Okay, thank you very much for these answers. So there was that next question from Gear. Thank you, Gear, for those many questions. And so his question, he's concerned about the European processor that you mentioned, which is kind of strategic initiative, let's say, for Europe to be independent from US and the rest of the world. So his question is, will that be itself like open hardware, or just based on reuse of open hardware? So what is current thinking in this area? Back to you.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I cannot say much on this because I'm not following closely the EPI initiative. Colleagues from the photonics and components units are following far more closely. And also this is an evolving discussion, and also this is based on the contributions from the community. Both approaches can be feasible, and also we need what it fits for purpose. But I don't have, I would like to be frank, I cannot say more on this because I don't have more information at this stage. Well, I cannot hear you now.
Sorry. I was muted,
okay.
Like to prevent echo.
Okay.
So there is next question from Marcello Miseroli, and his question about the digital skill that you mentioned on your slides, which is important for Europe to build up. And he asks about education-related programs. Is it education-related program? Will there be some initiative from European Commission to support educational program in digital skills? So yeah, back to you, Odysseas.
Thank you very much for the question. Now the discussion is because as I have mentioned, several things are ongoing and several discussions are taking places, not only within the DG Connect, but also among other European Commission services. So we do foresee to have some activities, actions in the context of training programs, but the only thing that is complete now, it was a call from DG Employment on the blueprint, I would say. It was about it was for the software industry, and it was about re-educating professionals in software technologies, and there was a specific provision about open source software. So it was a first step of further introducing open source in this kind of program, but also it is a test to see how this will go, what will be the feedback from the community, and how we can go further in deploying programs in this domain.
Thank you very much, Odysseas. So we have another question from Apostolos Kritikos, and he thank you very much for the great insights. His question is more about repositories, right? And he mentioned several projects like author directory, DevPost, EU versus viruses. So many EU-funded projects that develop a lot of open source software. And his question is about creation of the central repository on EU side, let's say. Will that happen? And would that be a requirement for existing project, say, an existing code? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's not a simple answer, yes or no. If you ask me if we want to build a repo for the EU-funded project, let's say research innovation project, at this time it's not our intention. And you know perfectly well that actually almost all European funded projects, EU-funded projects that they are delivering open source, they are using well-known repos in order to develop, maintain, promote their work. And also we are pushing them towards contributing to already existing or creating open source communities in order, to leverage the outcome of the project. So in that context, no, we do not foresee to create another repo. But what is needed, and that's for sure, is that actually we need to grab all this information. We need to know what kind of code and artifacts can be created in the European Research Project in order to make sure that we can promote them and publicize them, and in order to be reused by the wider research audience, for example. And that's something that we considering together with RTD in the context, either in the context of open science or in different initiatives. But this is, it's a clear direction, but I cannot say that we're gonna do this in 1 month, in 1 year or whatever. And this is one thing. The other thing that most of you know very well is the use of the Join Up platform for the government, and colleagues in DIGIT have done enormous work in maintaining the platform and making appealing for the public administration in order to use this as a reference for interoperable and open source solutions.
Thank you very much. So we have another questions coming from Artur Szymanowski. So he questions whether will be kind of steps in development of open source until 2025. So I believe that this relates to the European strategy for like promoting open source, and what will be kind of step approach in the programs for that one? Is there kind of clear indications for that?
Thank you very much for the question. I need to distinguish two things. The European Commission open source software strategy is a strategy for the internal use and exploitation and promotion of open source solutions, as I've mentioned. But also, it's an effort. The upcoming revision on changing the mindset within the European Commission and make colleagues and people think open, as we say, and in order to adopt best practice from the open source communities into our daily work. This is one thing, and towards this direction, yes, I see that in the coming years there will be more knowledge within the Commission about how open source works, how collaborative open source collaborative projects work, and what is that it is appealing, and what can be used, and how far we can go with that internally. The other thing is that we see also the need for policy making on open source as an innovation enabler for Europe. So that is, let's say, our external open source policy. It's the policy, the industrial policy under the industrial policy umbrella, in order to promote open source and make open source a weapon, I would say, and a key advantage for our industry. And there are certain trends on that. I mean, we have seen, as I've mentioned in my presentation, that a lot of acquisitions with multi-billion euros and dollars acquisition in the current years. And we have also seen a shift on business models based on open source. And we are sure that this will gonna continue in the future. And of course, Europe cannot stay behind. We do have the capacity. I mean, we've considered the manpower, the person power, and the human brain that we have in Europe, and the contribution in the open source community, it's huge. So we need also, to leverage from that, and also to make the most for our business. Now, if you ask me if I see this in one area or the other, I can very quickly highlight that, of course, AI, of course, cloud and edge, of course, blockchains. Blockchain are areas, blockchains also in the context of NGI, as I've mentioned, are areas where we see more and more the use of open source coming.
Thank you for this session. Back to Giancarlo.
Well, let me ask everyone to thank Odysseas for the great discussion. You know, a measure of the quality of the discussion is the number of questions which are being raised. And here we are going over time with the questions. So let's have a virtual clap. Let's please everyone clap for Odysseas for the great talk, And now I would like to tell you that while we are getting ready for the next session, so we leave Andrei to prepare for his session that he is moderating, that we have more than 100 people watching us through Telegram and through Facebook and other links. So this is an incredible result. Let me thank you, everyone. Let me thank Artyom and Mufi. And now Mufi, our DJ, will put some music while we wait in 5 minutes the next talk to come. Mufi, is your turn.
Okay, perfect.
And so Odysseas, you're of course welcome to follow that. So we'll host the 5 very great people, coordinators of EU projects to speak about their experience with open source, and all your comments and questions will be quite welcome. So please stay tuned. So yeah, so let us have 5 minutes break just to refill and set up, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mufi, go ahead.
Yes.